All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Working Towards Black. I am T Barnes of T Barnes Global Travel and T Barnes Beauty. And Working Towards Black is an effort to begin a conversation that I think is very needed between African Americans, Africans of the diaspora, and Africa, so that we can start communicating with each other to heal some of the brokenness and misinformation and disconnection that we have, and to fuel some of the really beautiful bonds that have been created since, end of colonialism, independence, and now like this resurging of African Americans and Africans of the diaspora rediscovering Africa and Africa discovering us. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I think that this is something that we are in desperate need of. There are so many misconceptions that we have about each other. Today, I am interviewing Selwana Tebogo Hudson. I love her name, so I'm going to say it again. Selwana Tebogo Hudson. She was born and raised in Botswana and has lived in New York for 17 years. And 22 years overall in the US. And she's moved to New York right after college from the University of Indianapolis in Indiana. And we've connected through social media, discussing, just some of these things that come up. And so welcome, 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 Selwana.
Thank you so much. I'm
Can you?
happy to be here.
Thank
I was looking forward to talking with you today. So, yeah.
you. She's so beautiful. But can you please introduce yourself? Tell them more about your organization, the kind of work that you're doing. I think that's important to kind of start with.
Okay. So, what I do have, it's too bad the website is not up and running right now. But Mabasi, I have a foundation. It's called Mabasi's Legacy. I will probably share stuff on my social media later on. So this particular foundation is about facilitating access to the gatekeepers and drivers of book markets to areas that have no access in Africa, right? So in Botswana, for instance, people who don't have access to literary agents, people who don't have access to get published on the global literary market. So this is what the whole thing is about. My background as a writer, I was going through, I remember one time when I was looking for, when I was looking for an agent, for my own work. And I was just, thinking about how, because I live here in New York, everything was much more accessible to me, and I was trying to figure out, well, how does somebody back home get published, and that's when I kind of came up with these writers' conferences. We had to cancel the one for August, which is going to be in Botswana.
Ooh, I want to be at the next one of those.
Yeah, and but now, during the quarantine, it's given us time to grow, actually. So it's not all lost. Time to grow. We're going to have writers' conferences, whereby we bring in literary agents, to Africa to look for talent, right? To give people a chance to get published, on the global literary market, on the international stage. Mm-hmm. It just, in the past, it seemed like a place, like a country like Nigeria had a conduit to get talent to the West, where I don't know, a lot of the African writers who were, up and coming, a lot of them were mostly Nigerian, which is wonderful. There is a formula, right? Somehow they're able to get talent here. So we're striving to extend that same access to places where they just don't have the access. So I'm super excited about this foundation, and I'll share everything later.
Yeah, I think that when we think about this idea of publishing and books, you know, the stories of Africa are mostly oral. And when we're talking about post-colonialism, a part of why all of this miseducation was able to happen is because our
Right.
own stories weren't being told, right?
Exactly.
Right. And so books weren't coming out of the continent. And when they weren't being written by our voices or African voices. And so when I read about your organization, I was like, and that's the work. Because that it seems like something so fundamental, like it's business driven, but it's so politically driven because without the voices, without the
Right.
stories, you
Politically.
don't get to really understand.
Exactly. And really literature bolsters the democracy in a lot of, areas. When you give people the international voice, when you amplify the voice, give them get them on an international stage, they can have they're able to afford to get, international support. Whereas, in areas where some dictatorships, everybody's voices is suppressed. Like you can't you can't have any help. You can't cry for help about anything.
Hmm.
Um, so it was really important, especially, I just want to get back to the point you talked about just owning our stories and being in control of our own narratives, especially in Africa. I mean, we've been through this. And I
Hmm.
think that we no longer have an excuse. We can document our own history. It is our responsibility to document our own history so that we can tell our children accurately how they came about, tell them their history much more, accurately. So I feel very passionate about that, about empowering people to own their stories and to insist that it's their responsibility to share it, to document it, to be prideful of it, to protect it, to preserve it. Um,
Absolutely.
so right now, a lot of people I know in Botswana, people, talk a lot about the education, Western education. They complain a lot about that. They want to have a curriculum that is, from the lens of Africans, things like that. But this is the work. This is what, you have to put things in your own hands and do it.
Yes. I think one of the interesting things is, you know, as I started traveling, there's so much rhetoric around Africa in America, as you well know, I'm sure. You've been here a long time.
Right. Mhm.
And I get it. You know, a part of it is this really beautiful, prideful connection that isn't
Mhm.
necessarily based on experience, but based on this desire. And I think that
Right.
that desire is in and of itself a beautiful thing. I don't discredit desire.
Right.
But one of the things that I always hear from African Americans that I just kind of smile at, and sometimes I challenge it when I got the energy girl, and then sometimes I don't. But it's this idea that, well, Africans know who they are. And I'm like, no, no, that's not happening. I think that you have very beautiful connections to culture. So
Right.
in terms of culture, there's this really strong identification with your names, you know,
Right.
your what the traditions are. But when it comes to education, that
Uh,
same miseducation, the same Western minds, it's all still there. And
right.
sometimes it's even worse because you're not growing up in a country like the US where you're able to challenge it and push back at it. You can't speak out in a
Right.
lot of countries.
In a lot of countries.
So how did you grow up learning about yourself? How did were there transitions where you realized there was a disconnect with the education?
I wouldn't say that I wasn't aware of that while in the midst of it. I was not. I just, I want to say when I kind of really woke up to really, look at a lens from like a, African lens, is actually when I came to this country. That's when I was like,
Mhm.
wait a minute,
Yeah.
because for the most part, you have to understand everyone in Botswana and in Zimbabwe, because I went to boarding school in Zimbabwe from 10 years old on, everyone around looked like me. I never had
Mhm.
to question anything for the most part. I'm thinking we all in this together. We all learning this together. I only just started to, the minute when I was 19, that's when I started to to kind of say, oh, when I was learning that, why wasn't I learning this instead? When I was in this country. And to be honest with you, I want to go back to a point that you made before you asked me this question. You were talking about people differentiate Africans and African Americans and say that Africans they know where they came from or something like that. And I really, it's one of the things that I hate. I hate when people make comments about African Americans don't know where they come from. Because I was in Senegal where I went to see the door of no return. If we're saying we know where African Americans came from, how would they not have culture? First acknowledge that it was taken from them, but it's still in them. They have where they come from. We're lazy about tracing the steps for some reason. We're not trying to really push the lever and trying to figure out to go, trace the steps back. Because if we talk about, I do want to probably get into slavery, but if we talk about that, I know there are some Africans kings or something who took part in selling their fellow Africans too, right? If I'm not mistaken with that.
That's always a touchy subject, though. People don't like
but
to really.
We never talk about. We're over here, dropping Jeff. What is it, George Washington or whoever statues and all that. But we have people in Africa who was working along with them, and we're still upholding these people, these kings who supposedly, But anyway, we can trace it. So I hate that people can say that. Not only can we trace it, African Americans developed their own culture and actually even know where they're from. Like there's no.
It's a beautiful thing that you say that, girl, because everybody doesn't always think that. Even African Americans themselves don't always think that they. I'm from Texas, so I know we're rich with culture. These traditions and histories and what we've created out of enslavement is deep. And I've never felt like I didn't have culture. But it's beautiful to hear Africans understand that a new culture has been created, but that those connections are still there. And I hear that more often than not, just for the record, right? Like, I think that people have had negative experiences. That has not been the case for me. I've always met African people that understood that there was something very deep and powerful connection between the two of us, and they knew what those things were. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. I certainly, I really feel like that, because another thing is that I think it also goes back to the history that we consume and the way that African American history is documented. It's not, well, in this country for sure, it's not adequately documented. There's just huge parts of history that purposely missed, so that we find ourselves in these areas. We're like, oh, where is this? These who don't know where they're from. No. It's just. What did you
grow up learning about African Americans as a young African woman?
The problem is, I grew up. I don't know. Different areas. Well, I imagine different areas are different, right? Different regions in Africa, different countries. So I went to Zimbabwe when I was 10. So that's when I can really, I want to say, remember identity, like growing into, to something and looking and to see what the influence and, around me. And we were all hip hop or R&B or American culture. Everybody, when I was 10 or 11, it was Belle Biv DeVore. This is Zimbabwe though. I don't know if other places were different. It was Belle Biv DeVore. I actually at the time there were talent contests, and we used to have drama classes and all these things. And I remember doing I think it was I can't remember what, I think it must have been a Madonna song though that I was doing some talent search on. But and then growing up from there, it was whoever was after that, whether it was the Toni Braxton years, the whatever years, Sissy Peniston, whatever, it was African American culture that we were drawn to. they definitely is I want to say maybe Southern African culture too that we would infuse in that. But
Hmm.
these are I want to say these are you know possibly rebellious kind of you know influences, whether it's music, because we just African Americans, looked empowered.
Mm,
They own their stories. It just appeared like that, and they were confident, and they were so we gravitated toward that as younger people.
interesting.
Yeah, I grew up to Biggie, Smalls, and Tupac like people did here, and I was in Zimbabwe. I did.
Right.
But you would find that some people down where I'm from, like my brother, for instance, he grew up on the Bob Marleys and the Peter Toshes. But this is also Jamaica. This is Zimbabwe. Like, how do you, right?
The intersections between Black people are so powerful and they're so deep. I've seen more connections than I have ever seen disconnections.
Right.
And I always like, I think that's why travel on the continent becomes so fundamentally important because African people get to interact with us and then we get to interact with them. And I think we start to see where these places really connect.
Right.
So you're in Zimbabwe, you're kind of growing up to hip hop like anybody else. What are you thinking about America? Like, are you, because if you're at private school, then you've grown up some resources. Are you being fed the whole idea of the yellow brick road and the roads of gold in the
Right.
US, or with, I know that sometimes depending on what class you're in the US,
Right.
you might
Right.
have a different perspective.
Right. Well, but for me, Botswana, a lot of Botswanas don't particularly think that way. I don't know if they've started to think that way, to think, I'm going to go, to America and make it. Because growing up, Botswana was always a middle class country, right?
Yes.
So you didn't have to leave to live a decent life, right? So even when I decided to stay here, it was like people from Botswana normally go right back home. When I decided to stay, it's like, what you must have, for you to let go of this, there must be something that's really so much better where you're going. It must be really big, because people and families want you to come back, and they want you to stay home. Um, so we were, proud of hip hop culture and looked up to everybody, but we didn't. I think a lot of it was also, the heaviness of our culture, right? Everything tradition, and as opposed to, and then I think hip hop was also helping to lighten up everything into, to make us feel independent, or from the culture. I don't know, to feel westernized in some ways. I don't know, but there was no need to feel like you have to go. You have
Mhm.
to go to America to make it.
What is Botswanan culture? What is that like? Like, so you're like when you're growing up like, as a little girl, like what are those experiences? What are the parents like?
um, oh, it's how do I do it? Let's see. My mother, everybody's story could be different, but my mother was the first in her family to get higher education, to get so my grandmother was not educated, and my grandfather, her parents, so she was the first to get, an MBA, to go all the way up. um, and that's another reason Mabasi's legacy, my foundation, is really named after my grandmother, because she she knew the value of education. Those people who would still go work in their farms and do all these things, they still knew the value of education and would invest in it in the best way she knew how. Like my parents knew they could go and pursue their careers and go to school, and she encouraged it, and she babysit it, whoever's kid. I remember being at a farm. We call it Massimo back home. It's where, like it's like an arid area where it's mostly just farms. So normally if you had it in Botswana, you'd have, well, my grandmother would have had the big farm. It was really kind of long and huge. And she had like she built, I don't know if she did it herself, but there was a hut right there so that whenever she was at the farm, that's where she lived. Even though her main residence would be like maybe an hour or, yeah, about 45 minutes or an hour. She didn't have a car. My mother was at Florida A&M University, and I was here. And I was off from boarding school in Zimbabwe, so I was home for the holidays. And my grandmother would know, this is who's going to be with me now while this one's doing this, this is doing this. And I'm going to take her to the farm with me, and she get me up. She has no car. We walk in an hour to her farm. So for a child, like, it felt like it was really hard life. Like when I remember it, you know, I was like, oh my God, this is what we're gonna do. But she took so much good care. She would stop, feed me, okay, and then she'd go to the farm and she'd work really hard and she'd bring me back. Like she knew the value of education. But these people who invest in that way, they don't get diplomas, they don't get revered, but I am where I am because she invested in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like us who did not grow up with educated grandmothers, I am my grandmother's hopes and dreams. This is what she hoped would happen, get you, go to school and do all these things. Anyway, long story short,
what was when you got to the US, right?
Yeah.
What kind of experiences have you had as an African woman in relationship to the Caribbean people? Because I mean, now you're in New York. So New York you're not just dealing with African Americans. It's a whole pot of blackness. Yes, of lots of blackness from lots of different places.
Right.
What are those experiences like?
I made friends immediately, when I got to school, to college. And I was in Indiana, actually, University of Indianapolis. I was able to relate to other people much more quicker. But then it might not be a fair thing, because I remember when I was younger, I had to go to boarding school in a totally different country that spoke a different language, and I had to learn how to
What did they speak in Zimbabwe? They don't speak English. They speak English.
They speak English, but they do have national languages. They have Shona, which I learned how to speak. Yeah. So I'm 10 years old and I'm seeing girls, in cliques and things like that. And I could see that even though Zimbabweans they do speak a lot of English for the most part, more than Botswanas would. Sorry. So I learned that, it looks like what bonded them was their language. And I was 10 years old. I learned it in 6 months because I wanted, to belong. So when I got here, I was
you were skilled.
Yeah, I was already
you already knew how to make that work.
Right. So it's harder for me to make a really good judgment on that. But I made friends.
You didn't have the whole African booty scratcher and negative African stereotypes.
I hear about that, but what does that actually mean? I hear that booty scratcher, African jazz. I'm like, I haven't actually heard it. I haven't heard what. I will Google it sometime.
I think that, and I say that not flippantly, because Africans I've lived between so many different cultures, and I've lived amongst Africans, and I know that there has been, whether it's that said specifically, I know that they've had negative experiences around, just being different, being African, and people having a difficult time relating to them. But that was not your experience. And so you were able, because you were skilled, to kind of come in and create a life for yourself.
Oh yeah. I certainly. And then also my school, we had a big international students too. So I bonded with everyone from even, from Africa, from Burkina Faso, from Tanzania, we were all like from whatever you name it, even Pakistan. We were, and Black Americans. We were just a melting pot.
So what would you say when you look at the landscape now and you look at where we are. I mean, I always say that, like, it's an exciting time. It's difficult because
Yes.
we're having these conflicts and we're trying to figure out how to talk to each other. But wow, like, we're connecting in a way that we have never connected. Like, I remember being the only person I knew besides one of my best friends that was like traveling through Africa, and having to always kind of be the spokesperson and be like, no, that's not true, or no, there's not lions in
Yeah.
every country that you go to, like, so having to be that person. But now, just, I mean, I was in Ghana for New Year's, and just when this is my second year doing that, been bringing people to Ghana for a long time, but just to be in that moment with so many different people, Black people from everywhere, and to
Right.
watch the camaraderie. It's like such an exciting, beautiful time. What do you see are the major challenges that we're having now?
I think that when it comes to just even blackness as a whole, we're the we're just so removed from each other. We are. I think we create that within our own cultures too. We literally say as well Africans. We create division within literally the same country. We are like, no, you're there, I'm here. We literally create the division, and instead of I don't know, blackness is so rich. Like when I think of that, we're just so rich in everything, whether it's whether it's our spirit, or the empathy even, or our skin, everything. We're just so rich. And imagine if there was no disconnection. Like
Yeah.
we look at each other like the other, until we have somebody else who's a different race, maybe then we're like, oh, okay.
Right.
But for the
Let's
most part,
talk.
among ourselves, we
Let's talk about, because I think one of the things that I'm always trying to get people to understand is that, these ideas of, I think some of the times when Black people in America say, we don't support each other, we don't get along, I'm like, this might be natural for us, because the continent is divided in and of itself pre-colonization, right, between tribes, and
try
how deeply
very
that really plays itself out in culture.
very
And
territorial too.
yeah, tell me a little bit about, like, what's your experiences? Because I think that people need to start to really kind of deconstruct these ideas. Like, this existed. This is not something that was created from colonialism. This is something that's deeply African.
Yeah.
Tell me what that is. And what I think is that they've just been able to manipulate it, right? So what are some of the experiences that you have with tribalism and how you see that playing out just strictly on the continent?
Well, tribalism, people they use their tribes of, their culture, whatever within the tribes, as a source of empowerment, right? So they go so far as to want to be my culture, because I came from this, and this is how we do things. I'm the top, dog. It's more of us, so we must be the stronger people. Um, so I think a lot of it, it's a thing about empowerment. People want to feel empowered, and they want to feel they want to feel empowered. They want to, because when I think about just in Botswana, like the little things that people might have, you find that it's about, oh, this tribe say they're it's a lot more of them, or they've had more presidents come from their tribe, or these ones have something else that they want to say. And we're also quick to suppress the smaller tribes, like it's natural. Like you know
Mhm.
we if they don't have any power, we will literally totally ransack the whole thing.
I
So
think that that is interesting in the conversation of class. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. So if
yeah,
you have
yeah.
something to add, but so when we think about class, I think because the struggle in the US, race and class are so deeply connected.
Correct.
And I think that they're also deeply connected. I wouldn't say race, but tribalism and class are connected.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but there's less of a tendency to want to break down ideas around class in Africa. I think I find Africans to be very, very attached to their class,
Yes.
even when they're not of the power class. Like they're very easily set into these roles.
Right.
Talk to me about what am I witnessing? Because I watch and I don't always completely understand, but I'm observing. I'm seeing something. I
Right,
know
right,
something is
right.
there. Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to think about even just my mother. Botswana is very classist, by the way. It's very, if there's one thing it is, it's very, classist. So a lot of classism. I don't know. I just tend to think I still tend to go back to this idea of people wanting empowerment, people wanting their life to remain, easier if they dominate, if they remain in this place. Somebody else is coming, even in Botswana, like right now, people are coming and saying, there are no jobs and kids are, graduating college, nobody has jobs. And, the ruling class, whatever, people, they're not willing to they're not willing to share their privilege that much. They're still, adamant about, my life, I have no problem with my life, and this is where I'm at. So it's the classism comes from people just wanting to maintain their power, their connection to power, or their,
I mean,
I
I think
think.
in Africa it becomes like, as we're thinking about how we move forward and how we really heal some of the ills that are happening on the continent so that,
Right,
what I hope is that we can all just be home, right? We can
right,
all go back and we can all help build the continent up. But if you don't attack the both of them simultaneously, right? Like you can't attack the oppression of colonialism and not attack the oppression of class.
right.
And but if you have people that, what I found, I remember I got into a lot of trouble with the Nigerians. Girl, the Nigerians tore me up one day because there was a picture that I deconstructed around this very light skinned girl. She ended up being a famous person I didn't know, right? Holding and three, four like darker children and their traditional garb. One was holding an umbrella over her, and the other two were holding these Louis Vuitton bags on their heads. And I know Africa well enough to know that, yes, there's always going to be people to service you, right? Kids are going
Right.
to come up and try to take your bag. Like this is a part of just how African society works, especially if you roll up in a car, there's going to be people around you that are going to, try to serve you. And I get
Right.
that. But my question was like, it was also a nod to old colonial behavior, right? And this,
Right.
and so the attack was, no, this is culture.
This is culture.
Culture. And I thought that was fascinating that there was this idea that these deeply rooted, problematic class constructs were also considered culture, and that it didn't matter, because I could tell based on how some people were writing and other people were writing, there was different classes of people coming to attack. And a part of that is just Nigerians, you come from one, you come from all, and that's just how it's going to be if you're different, right? Like I get that about Nigerian folks. But the other part of it was that they were also really attached to these ideas. Do you find that that works the same in Botswana? Like, and how have you adjusted to that being in the US with it being such a different type of way that we deal with? I mean, class is the same, I think it's structured the same, but because race and class are always being deconstructed here.
Right, right. Thinking about Botswana right now, I'm thinking, as you were, describing, the whole picture, with the baby, I want to say, when we talk about colonial times and the roots and whatever that's connected to that, even in Botswana, there's still this thing of wanting proximity to whiteness. There's still this thing of, I will be more, palatable if I behave white, or there's still that thing. There's still that thing. So I imagine when you talk about, the the complexion of the women down here and the babies. You know, I can't make a judgment on Nigeria because I don't know Nigerians that well or the cultures that well, but I think all over Africa we still see that thing. The proximity to whiteness is still a thing.
Mhm.
It's still a
It's
thing.
no different. I think one of the things
Um,
that I think this show will really help to show is that all our problems are pretty much the same. They
yeah,
articulate themselves differently depending on where you are, but how they're playing themselves out and the reasons and the roots are pretty much all the same.
right.
And figuring that out is going to be, I think that will help us to, it'll help us to find the connections between each other.
Yeah, right. And it's funny because you know, while we were talking about that proximity to whiteness and I grew up being you know taught to be you know be well behaved, be gentle or be calm or be soft spoken, or you know it was just always about um, restricting myself, you know, just so I learned how to be uh, more vocal or more, you know, wanting to unleash my urge to fight for justice. For instance, when I came to this country, I
Mhm.
learned I learned that from Black women. Like even just my foundation, like you know, trying to do stuff like I you know I watched how Black women move, like even just trying to solve problems or try to fight for justice in whatever ways. I watched how they move, and these are all stuff that was instilled in me. You know, after coming here and after watching Black women, after watching them move, um, and watching them and watching how they approached white supremacy, for instance, and how they fought for their own and how they you know centered their own and I really learned that here and I probably would not even have the foundation if I wasn't taught to do
Wow.
that by Black women. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, what about you know African writers who have no access? Let me figure out how I'm going to do this. Let me figure out like I you know what I mean. The spirit I got it. I learned it from Black women here.
Wow.
So
That's a powerful statement. And I think that'll be really healing. You know, I feel like there's so many African Americans that don't get the feeling that Africans are interested in us or, you know,
mm,
feel like we're worthy or, you know, I think that there's definitely all these feelings of or like feeling like orphans in the world, you know. So when you have these kind of moments where someone shares something that's a very to find your voice and to be able to utilize that, you know, and I think for me it's interesting because I realized that as an African American, I always felt on the periphery of American society. I never really felt American. And I didn't really start to feel American until I started to travel, right? And
mhm.
that's when I realized, oh, okay, I have a lot of
I
Americanism.
know.
Yeah, I have a whole lot of Americanisms.
Yeah.
And, you know, but Africa has taught me this really like beautiful space of how much I am like so much of African traditions are in me, you know, just naturally are part of it. And how much people want connection. I think more people want connection than not.
Right.
It's the pain, it's the negative experiences that where people start to act out. But
Right.
most of the time people want the connection.
Right. Right. I definitely agree with that. That's where and if you even just with strangers, regular people, when you know, the minute you find and or talk about what you really have in common, your guard just goes down.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with us Black people in the diaspora, you know, everywhere. I feel like we're still very if I'm looking at, you know, maybe like Haitian person, um, I'm thinking that they are Haitian and I'm here, I'm African. Like I'm not thinking that we're really at the end of the day one and the same. We just talked about how we were socialized. You know, you grew up in this culture, but we really are the same. We, you know, there's nothing different. But I and I wanted to give back to that point that, when I was talking about Black women, and I grew up, in Botswana, surrounded by women who were empowered. My mother, my aunts, the women were, they're independent, breadwinners. They had a strength about them, but it was always to pursue careers. It was to pursue career, and to do good for yourself. It was never about giving me a voice. I wouldn't say I picked it up from that. I wouldn't say I picked it up from that. It was, you still had to behave a certain way, as you get your career and you climb up. You still had to have this palatable, I want to say white proximity kind of thing going. And only when and I I got here, I was able to, to find, I don't even know how to explain it, to to honor exactly what I want, to fight for, even just fight for the things that I want, just in Africa, our culture, your parents determine sometimes what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do for school. This is, you don't have much of a voice in everything. My mother to this day thinks that I'm probably one of the most rebellious children she's ever had. Simply because I refused to go back home immediately after college, right? I just had to stay. I didn't listen to a parent. So
that's the Americanisms. Like, and
right.
it's
It was
the
more
wonderful
natural for me to be myself, to do things that I
exactly.
want, to have freedom.
But I think that is what allows me to start to, I feel better in Africa. I do. But I understand the privilege that I've had to be an American, because America comes, but I couldn't appreciate that without being in Africa.
Right, right.
Like you need these juxtapositions to be able to say, oh, well, wait a minute, I see how all of these things are playing out. So, Selwana, what is your hope? Like when you look at the landscape of where we are, what do you want for us?
I'm honestly happy, because when I look at what the youth are doing, the children, like younger people get it. Our parents and whoever else, that's,
They did the best they could, and they got us to
yeah,
this point.
yeah.
Yeah.
But younger people find more connection. Maybe social media. I don't know what it is that's making them that's making them connect much more easier. They connect faster. They're more compassionate, empathetic. They want justice for everyone. Younger people are not as territorial. They want to share. They're not so rigid in the way that maybe some of us grew up. But so I'm very hopeful. Even just things like conversations that you started having, which I think is just a really good thing. I support your brand and what you do, and I think it's just a great thing. We need to talk more, and I think this is what it takes, to get to know each other more, to start really talking about what it means to be African or Black American, and where did we, lose connection. We never really used to talk about that. I don't think, even with my friends, growing up, I don't think I ever really discussed what makes you, Black American, and what makes me African. I do remember one time, one of my really closest friends, Black American girl, she used to complain a lot about seeing, I want to say, she used to make comments about Oprah going to Africa to help. It's like, what is she doing there? She should be over here helping our community, helping us, And I used to feel like she doesn't see me back then. I'm like, but why would you think that helping Africans is not helping you? In my head, I used to think that, but I never used to voice it. We never had those conversations, even though we were super close, super tight, best friends, But now I think people are talking. People are getting better understanding of who each other are, and that we're not so different after all. We really are not so different.
Mhm.
So I'm hopeful, and I think that it's a great time to be alive right now, to see the
It
changes
is.
going on. You know, we have people like you who are proactive and say, listen, I'm gonna
We're gonna get this all the way together.
right, let's have these conversations, getting everybody to the table. What's going on, you know. And I know we had discussed where we talked about, you know, during the George Floyd, you know, protests, you were like, you know, I don't see Africa, you know, rooting for us. We know, where's everybody? And you know, when Africans were in China, we saw, you know, the African people come up and say, oh, bring all people back. He says, well, what about, you know, you were like, what about us? Even though eventually it looks like people, the you know, the leaders or whatever, they
They got it
eventually
together.
they
Yeah.
got it together. They got it together. But even just questions like that, you need to ask that. You need to say, wait, you know, wait, what about what's going on over there? Why is it that they're not asking for us? Why is that, you know? But even just that, I just loved hearing that. You know, we need to keep talking, having conversations, and
One of the interesting things that came out of that, I got so many letters from all over Africa. It was, I mean, overwhelming,
right.
honestly. I spent a day crying about it. It
Oh,
was a lot. And
that's good.
I'm always emotional. But one of the things that one guy said is, hey, look, we don't fight for ourselves. The way that we're not raised to have the voice, just same way that you're saying. So, and the way, so if you grow up in a country, in a community, and you're not used to being able to even fight for you, and because Africa has always, in comparison to the US, it's always, they don't always look at themselves as, they look at themselves as the one that is the need and the need. So it's difficult sometimes to see you going out to say, okay, but we have to help them, because I don't know that Africa
Got
sees
it.
itself in position, right? Like, so it's in position now
Got it.
to help. And that's a
Got
mind
it.
shift, right? It's a mind shift to see the
Mm-hmm.
continent in that
Mm-hmm.
way. But when he said,
Right.
we don't even know how to fight for ourselves, it kind of put it all into perspective for me, you
That's
know,
a
and I
good point.
started to realize, like, oh, okay, yeah, there's a lot with this, you know, like
Yeah.
there's a reason why, and because no one was saying we don't care about you. No one came back and was
Yeah.
like, we don't need to fight for you, fight for yourself. No one said
Right.
that. I
Right.
didn't read
Right.
that anywhere. But it was definitely this idea that, like, oh, we can say something on behalf of,
Yeah. Say
you
something.
know, our people. And I think that that was a really a very interesting shift for me mentally, about realizing that how we empower each other
Mm.
is by releasing, getting people all we have to all release our voices, you know, and it
Right.
has to be collective. So I'm going to ask this question to everyone, and I like to tell my version. So I always say that Blackness is a political identity.
Right.
We're taking this away from the racialized context that Europeans have created, and we are using it as an identifier that says that we are making a collective effort to understand ourselves through a unification. And that's going to take all kinds of things to happen. You know, a lot of things have to go away in order for that to come together. When
Right.
you think about Blackness as an African woman that comes from a place that is tribal and has these differences, what is Blackness to you?
I want to say I never, you know, I never grew up thinking that Blackness was a political identity. I never grew up thinking, you know, being conscious of it. You know, it makes sense, obviously, but I never grew up um, being conscious of that, you know, and only now, obviously, after maybe the last few years, that it became just more apparent to me. That it became more apparent to me, and even more pronounced now with things that are going on. I think that just even Blackness being a political identity, I think it's getting carved even deeper during these times.
Mhm.
People are more or less becoming more conscious of that. Like I was saying before, whereas I never even saw it in that way, people are becoming more conscious than that. So what I want to say is that I've started to look at it that way, that Blackness is a political identity, and it inspires me, right? It inspires me to think about us as a collective, with all the richness of Blackness from different continents, different places. With all the richness we have, it really, there's a lot of strength in that, and it's not even a word that I particularly want to use, but there's a lot of strength in us as a collective. If ever, we
If
were to
ever there was a time.
merge
Yeah.
as we're meant to be.
Yeah.
But so I do see Blackness as a political identity now, more so now than ever, Um,
Do you
um,
think, is there hope that in your country of Botswana, that
mhm.
between tribes they will start to understand themselves collectively? Do you have hope for that?
I think they do understand themselves collectively. Before, I was going to say something when you talked about some Africans not being able to fight for themselves. My mother made a comment the other day. I think that there are some protests going on, in Botswana, and she was talking about what happened. I think a few years back, maybe two or more. I can't remember. Maybe the past administration in Botswana, where kids from University of Botswana had, they went on strike and they were protesting. They wanted jobs. That's all they were asking for, and they were attacked. I think, by police, or but the government was not trying to hear it. They got attacked, and they never went back out on the street again. So she was commenting on how she's like, Tawana children, or Tawana, I don't know if she said children. She just said Tawanas are fearful. They're people. They're a fearful kind of people. So the minute you strike them, like, what, it's not going to happen again. They're not going to try to push. They're not going to try to push.
Mm,
She I was like, wow. I was like, okay. Because I had said, maybe they're going to be more protests now. People are talking about they want jobs. And she's like, they're not going to push. They're fearful. This happened last year. They were struck. People were striking them. And I don't think they're trying to do that again.
mm.
So, so, so among tribes, I think,
Am I asking for too much? I'm asking for too much.
no. The good thing is that they've never been in, a tribal war. There are obviously subtleties, things that go on, but there's never been a tribal war within the country, because it just so happened that the tribe that is, in power is I don't know how many percent. I don't know if it's 70%, of the country is just too dominating, I guess, for others to really fight, or yeah. So over there, the tribal thing hasn't really, hasn't spilled over. Hasn't
That's
spilled over.
okay.
Maybe politics, yeah, but not tribal, not tribes.
So, how do people get in contact with you? How do they support with the work that you're doing? There's plenty of literary people in the T. Barnes Landia landscape. How do they help you do what you do?
So
And
I
how do
would
people
say,
find you?
right, I'll say stay in contact with my social media. Selwana Tebogo Hudson. That's what's on my Facebook. And I want to say Sel Hudson would be my Twitter, and Sel Hudson would be my Instagram. I'm going to be enrolling all the conference dates that we're going to be sharing in the website once stuff starts working properly. Once we cancel the August conference, which was just mainly for Southern Africa, and now that we're including more Eastern African conference and Western African writers conference, we kind of had to rebuild the site to be inclusive. to accommodate all those things. So I will be sharing stuff maybe from my page and all that. So that's gonna
Awesome.
be there.
Girl,
Yeah.
thank you so much. It was so good to see your face and
Good to
to
see
talk to you.
yours. Your
And
beautiful
I
face.
appreciate it. This is it's a lot for people to take their time, and I'm appreciative, and I know that we're all short of time often. And thank you very much. I appreciate you being
Anytime.
part of
I was excited to
Working
share
Towards
with
Black.
you. I'm so
All
excited.
right. Thank you guys. Thank you for tuning in. If you have questions, I'll definitely post all of her social media so that you can get in contact with her, especially if you're African writers and you're tuning in from Southern Africa and want to participate in her
Right.
organization. Please follow me on at T Barnes Global Lifestyle. Join the global movement on Facebook, and I'll post that again as well. Really just trying to, you know, I'm not necessarily like the social media queen or whatever, but I
Me too.
understand that these are tools, right? These are
Me
tools.
too.
And in order to grow and in order for the voices to be heard, the numbers matter. So thank you very much. Thank you. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much,
All
Tanisha.
right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.